everybody, and welcome to Conversations with Authors. Today, we bring to you Laura Munson and her newest book, Willa Silvester, 4 Women, 1 Week, 1 Question. Before we get to our authors properly, allow me to welcome you to Book Passages Conversations with Authors. If you've seen one of these events before, well, welcome back. We're glad to have you here again. We're very happy and love our return customers. But if you're new here, Book Passage is an independently run bookstore out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and we host and run book talks just like these ones very often throughout the week. Sometimes we do it every single day, except Sundays. We don't do it on Sundays. But as we are now streaming on YouTube, and will continue to do so in the future, please consider subscribing by clicking the subscribe button below. It's completely free and honestly, really truthfully does help us out. But also, if you click the little bell right next to the subscribe button, it helps you out because you will be alerted every time that we go live for one of these talks, and you don't have to miss out on something you otherwise would have really enjoyed. If you'd like to check out our upcoming events, or just like the idea of an email newsletter more, I write that, and you can find it at bookpassage.com. On the right-hand side of the page, there's a little thing that says e-newsletter. That has the same effect, and we love people on our letters. That's very nice. There are some people out there that like emails. If you'd like to check out tonight's book, which is, again, Willa Silvester, or anything else that's mentioned here tonight, you can find it all in the description below the video, or from me spamming it in the YouTube chat periodically. And speaking of the YouTube chat, if you have any questions for tonight's speakers, please take the time to write them in the YouTube chat. It's the only way to get your questions to our speakers today, and so do not miss your chance if you do happen to have a question. We don't always get to all of them, but we do try our best. Now, allow me to introduce Laura Munson, who is the author of our book today, and the New York Times bestselling author of This Is Not the Story You Think It Is, which chronicles her journey through her own midlife crossroads. Drawing from the striking response to her memoir, the essay version of it, in the New York Times Modern Love column, and her speaking events of women's conferences across the U.S., Laura founded the acclaimed Haven Writing Retreats and Workshops. After watching over 1,000 people find their unique and essential voices under the big sky of Montana, which she calls home, Laura created Willa. She created The Invitation, The Friends, and The Town to share everything that she's learned from people globally. The hardcover version of Willa Silvester is a USA Today bestseller, and her work has been published and featured in many media outlets throughout the world. In conversation today, we have Grace Kraaijvanger. That's my best try, sorry everybody. Who is a visionary entrepreneur, artist, and community maker, as well as the founder of The Hivery, a co-working space and inspiration lab with 2 locations in the Bay Area and with a global community. The Hivery began as a realization of her long-standing dream to create both literal and metaphorical space for each of us to reach our fullest potential. All are welcome at the Hivery as a celebration of the power and impact of kindness in community and business. Grace is a go-to speaker, writer, and business mentor who has interviewed and hosted luminaries like Dr. and First Lady of the United States Jill Biden, Diane von Furstenberg, and many more people whose names I can't pronounce. Grace and the Hivery have been featured in outlets such as Domino, San Francisco Chronicle, Marin Independent Journal, Huffington Post, Entrepreneur Magazine, and I'm certain many more. She's currently working on a book on the meaning and moments of grace. Everybody, thank you for coming along. Please welcome Laura and Grace to the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Nick. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to have the honor of interviewing an author who I deeply admire, Laura Munson. So thank you for this opportunity. One thing I wanted to start with was the way that I met Laura. Laura was doing her book tour right at the beginning of the pandemic, and she was actually one of the last events that we were holding out for during the closure of March 2020. So we were really disappointed that we weren't able to host Laura in person. And I've watched her pivot as an author and do her book tour virtually amidst the challenges that ensued from that. And she's done it with such grace and wisdom. So thank you so much, Laura. We finally get to have the conversation we've been trying to have for quite some time. And I'm grateful to Book Passage for giving us an anchor to do that. Laura, I'd like to turn it over to you to read a bit from Willa Silvester, and then I'm excited to dig into our conversation.
Me too. And I just have to say, Book Passage is one of my favorite bookstores in the world. And when the first book came out, I spoke at Book Passage in the ferry terminal. And I was so excited to do the work with you, Grace, at the Hivery. We were going to do a workshop and a reading. And we've never met in person, but we're close. We're friends. We're kindred sisters.
Yes.
So this whole thing is very full circle for me and very meaningful as I sit here in Montana. So yeah, I'd like to thank all of you and all of you who are here tonight. To begin this, I'd like to read the letter to the reader in the book, which to me sums up what I think Grace and I are going to be talking a lot about tonight, and that's the importance of community and coming together. And so this book, while it's a novel and it's a true novel, it's really a call to action to perhaps model what these characters do in this novel and create your own community. So one of the characters says in the book, you know, we're all fluent in this language, in the language of community, and yet we so rarely speak it. It really is our mother tongue. I'm going to say that one more time. You know, we're all fluent in this language, in the language of community, and yet we so rarely speak it. It really is our mother tongue. And here's the letter. Dear reader, I have learned something that might just be the most important lesson of my life, and I would like to share it with you. There is a language that we crave, a language of the heart that grows from our worry and our wonder and our stories, rooted in our experience of this beautiful and heartbreaking thing called life. Mm-hmm. Too many of us have trained ourselves out of speaking that language. We were all fluent in it when we were children. But somewhere along the way, we were taught or conditioned to forget it, to not be honest when we are asked, how are you? And to not really listen to the answer when we ask others the same question. So many of us have lost our authentic voices and reduced our conversations to grocery store talk and texts with an emoji at the end. This was written before the pandemic. Now with, it's very different, but still we say we're fine when we're not. But I'll back that up. So many of us have lost our authentic voices and reduced our conversations to grocery store talk and texts with an emoji at the end. The truth is, we long to be seen and heard and accepted, especially when we are in pain. Yet, out of fear of judgment or rejection, we too often draw in and become islands rather than bridging to our family and friends. I know this because at times I've made that choice. And the fallout from that led me to devote a major piece of my life to bringing people together in safe, intimate circles of self-expression, which led me to write this book. I wrote Willa Silvester to capture the power of people stepping out of the isolation and self-doubt that so many of us feel in times of transition, and instead gathering together, which is what we're all doing tonight, even though we're not together in person. These women show us that we don't have to endure hardship alone, nor should we. We have choices. If, for whatever reason, connecting with our usual community is too fraught, we can instead create temporary circles, friend to friend to friend to friend, carving out small interludes from our daily lives in order to focus on what comes next. To have those conversations we need to be having, but aren't. To move boldly outside of gossip, small talk, pretending, and into the connection we so deeply need. I hope that in reading this book and in the spirit of Willa, Bliss, Harriet, and Jane, you will be inspired to reach out to your own dear friends, whether close by or far away, and that you will invite them to come together for short respites to support one another in the powerful way that people can when they give themselves permission to say yes to the profound invitations of their lives. My mission is this: we will start a movement of week-long interludes from the stresses and pain of our crossroads moments and in radical and real communication. We will provide ourselves and our kindreds with a map for our next steps. Our voices deserve to be honored and heard. No one has your voice. No one. However we speak, now is the time for truth. And yes, we don't have to do it alone. Yours, Laura. So that's at the end of the book. Now, I just wanted to read the actual invitation. In fact, I'll just read, it's the beginning of the book. It's very short, and then we'll get into our conversation. It begins, on a typical day in their typical lives, 3 women went to their mailboxes and found, amid junk mail and bills and shiny flyers for unshiny things, an invitation sealed with a bold W pressed into sage green wax. They had been waiting for this invitation. They longed for it as much as they feared it, because to break this seal was to release a behemoth of a question so impossible that they had almost stopped asking it. Each hesitated, looked around, and in respective order, thought, sweet Jesus, what the hell? Here goes nothing. And slid her finger under the seal, revealing a thick handmade note card pressed with silvery leaves. Words winked up at them, words that might, if given the chance, change everything. They swallowed and pulled out the card. Inside, nestled with a wild bird feather, were the following words. You are invited to the rest of your life. You know you can't go on like this. Not for one more day. You need an interlude. Imagine this. You're in a farmhouse in Montana, wrapped in a soft blanket, sitting by a warm wood stove. There's a cup of tea in your hand, just the way you like it. There are women surrounding you who need this just as badly as you do. We all have the same question. The question is, so now what? Come to Montana and find out. Love, Willa. You don't have to do this alone. Each woman held the invitation to her heart, drew in a deep breath before letting out an exhausted sigh that echoed from Connecticut to Wisconsin to California and back to Montana, and went inside to call a dear friend. And that's how the book begins.
I absolutely love it. Thank you so much, Laura, for sharing that. It's profound to me as I listen to you read just how meaningful these questions, these explorations, this tenacious commitment to gathering and community, how important it is now. And I think it's really powerful that you wrote this book before the pandemic, and yet here we are re-grappling with these questions of transition and new life chapters. So one of the questions that I want to start with is the premise of the book, this so now what? It's such an important question that we all ask throughout chapters of our lives. And when we ask that question, so now what, it's typically from a place of uncertainty, because life has handed us something we weren't expecting, which is for all of us right now, this world that we live in of so now what? So I'd like to hone in on that question and just ask for the inspiration of the question and how that question created the foundation for the story.
So over here is my memoir, which is all about so now what. And I have not honed the craft of writing memoir, and somehow I wrote one and it became a bestseller and published in 9 countries. And I thought, well, there's something to this thing, exposing yourself and writing past the fear of exposure and being emotionally responsible for it. But my love is fiction. So watching all these women that would come to the retreats that I lead, I realized so many of them were in crossroads moments, just as I was in this memoir. So I thought, I want to get back to fiction. And I want to get into, that itchy, scratchy friction place that is the conflict, that is the human condition. And I want to capture it based on the retreats that I lead, and I see the people who go on retreats, anybody who's a seeker who does something like travel around the world or go someplace for a weekend or go to the redwoods and seclude themselves for a few days, they need that time to regroup and ask themselves that raw, naked question, what's next? So now what? And so while I kind of did that in this one, I didn't want to be the main character again. And so I thought, how could I capture what happens on Haven writing retreats? How can I capture what I've experienced in my different chapters of reinvention in my life and put it into a novel? And so that's where the invitation was born, and these characters and the story.
It's so beautiful. And what I've experienced through my work in the high read that I so related and resonated with in your book is just that no one gets out of jail free on that. We all go through life in periods of uncertainty and in periods of being the seeker, and then we may seek and clarify and find a direction and have the rug pulled out from under us and have to seek again. So what I thought really resonated is this idea that is never a done deal. That's something that these uncertainty through life's challenges, whether they're death that your characters go through, financial challenges your characters go through, loss of all varieties that your characters go through, those are shared by all of us as a collective. I thought it was really fascinating how each woman, each character told her story of loss and uncertainty through that lens. Can you talk to us a little bit? And I'm such a big believer in women sharing their stories and using their voices, as you expressed. But you conveyed that so beautifully through dialogue. Will you talk to us a little bit about the importance of women sharing their stories as we grapple with these challenges and uncertainties of life?
Sure, my favorite subject, and it's every human. We need to be telling our stories, and we rarely make the space for it. And I'm writing a book right now all about creative self-expression. And I think a lot of us were raised with seen but not heard, speak when spoken to, don't show off. Like, I was kind of raised with 50s parents, but like maybe later, like, who do you think you are that you have this opinion, or you must have letters after your name in order to be an authority on anything. And I think that quest for perfection really messes people up. And my life's work is really, since I've been little, is to create the space for people to tell their stories. Now, a lot of those stories are mythic. A lot of them are about blame and victimhood, but like to tell your real story. And so this draft that people are reading is the 19th draft. The first one, I wrote it, and I got to the end and I thought, okay, good exercise in learning. And for the writers out there, it takes a while. Go through the dark woods and get to the end, figure out what you've created, and then go back in and start again if need be, or work off of what you've already created. And with Willa's Grove, I realized, okay, I need to start again, because I had a mission that was all about, we need to create space to tell our stories. Right? But what needed to happen, so they all showed up, the first version, like ready to tell their stories. What we need is the reality of it, which is the conflict, the resistance, that I don't want to tell my story, that I'm fine in the grocery store, the pretending, the hiding. So by the time, I got to the 19th draft, I knew that I finally had allowed the characters to tell it. And what they did, and anybody who's writing fiction out there knows, even if it's more plot propelled, I'm more of a character driven writer, they know that the characters ultimately tell the story. And so you have to make the space for them to do that. And so they realized that they needed to not just have one person talk for 2 hours and one person talk for 5 minutes and, be like, okay, what are we doing tomorrow? I'm uncomfortable. And, body language like this and looking for the exit sign. Instead, they created this wonderful thing that I love, which is to break down their so now what to what they thought would happen with their story, what they're there to figure out, what they whether it's, well, we're going to get into the characters in a minute, I hope, but what they thought was going to happen, right? What the supposed to, and then what actually happened. And if they're there to try to figure out, so now what, something tells me that what they thought would happen and what actually happened are not one and the same. And so when they break it down like that and then give each other the space to really get to know each other, I think that's when the magic happens for storytelling, right? Because how often in life does somebody say, hey, Grace, let's just sit down, have tea, and you just talk to me about your whole life story for an hour and I'm going to listen. Like, that's pretty rare. So this way of them doing it really, really works well in the book. And that's part of what I want to model if people want to create their own grove.
I really appreciated that, because you're absolutely right that when put on the spot of, let's solve your life, let's figure out your problem and problem solve it. I mean, I just have seen through my work in the library that never works. Of course, that never works. It makes us all clam up. We can't even remember who we are or who we want to be. But what I really appreciated and what you did so beautifully in the dialogue was you allowed them to enmesh themselves in these different environments that made it easier to tell the truth, made it easier to share the story. And I would love if you will talk a little bit about your use of dialogue, because I was really profoundly impressed with how the decisions you made, as and I'd love to just hear more about that, the decisions you made of how you use dialogue to show the story unfurling, to show that truth. Like you said, the truth doesn't come all at once. It kind of unfurls and comes out and creates space for the next truth and the next truth. Will you talk a little bit about the dialogue piece and how you utilize that?
Sure. Well, a lot of it is the creation of trust, right? So remember, these four women, they don't all know each other. So one asks a friend who's in a crossroads moment, who asks another friend who she imagines might be hiding and pretending, and the stuff we all do, saying we're fine when we're not, when we're shattered inside, who asks another, right? So we've got four people and each one at least knows one. And that's pretty special. I think, can you do this with like best friends? Sure. But there's something about this kind of leaving home and coming together with people with a real intention here. And so when I was writing it, I realized, and I'm just being really honest, because again, I'm writing this book about self-expression. I think if you're writing a book, sometimes you have to ask yourself, what is the question that this book answers personally? And many of us who write are writing from a place of service, like we've got a point and we want to make it. But I think it's important to hold up the mirror to yourself. And I think part of why I'm writing the book I'm writing right now is that it was not valued to talk when I was growing up. I'm not blaming my parents. It's just, it was like, you can talk for a little while and then you need to stop. And we do that a lot, right? Like, think about that. It's like, okay, but enough about me, or, oh, I'm doing all the talking, or some people, and I'm one of them, will ask a lot of questions so I don't have to talk, right? I think we all have sort of these kind of communication tics, but to actually create a space where you can talk is something I think quite rare. And so as I was writing it personally, I was just like, in a sweat, like, nobody's going to like this. Too much talking. How am I going to pull it off? So I created so it really, if you read it, it's just a little bit of like prestidigitation. So it's like one person's telling a story like when they're having tea, and then the next person's telling their story when they're having dinner. And then the next one is like, I'm so hot, I need to get outside. I can't stand all this talking, and let's go out on the front porch. And then they end up in the inn for the last one, who ends up falling asleep. And I think that part is important. The idea of creating the space, especially when people are uncomfortable, for telling their stories, again, breaking it down possibly. And then I thought that I would get so much, once you've written a book, you get people who love it and people who hate it. But I thought with this book, it's like the first 100 pages, they're talking. And and that was a big button for me as a child. Like, you talk too much, stop talking to it. And I'm hearing it right now in my head. Okay, Laura, stop talking, get back to Grace. Well, I'll tell you what, I haven't had one critic say anything about that. They were like, oh no, we loved getting to know the characters. But again, I think the people who are reading this book are people who are kind of contemplative, who long for that kind of connection. So it's just funny. You never know, for those of you out there, whatever you're creating, whether it's a book or a conversation with somebody, what we bring into it with our own story from our past, if we can write past that or express past that, that might be the exact thing that gives other people permission to do the same. And that's what
It's
I found.
profoundly, yes. I'm excited because there were, what I appreciated about the dialogue as well is that there was like this like cadence of that we've all been in before, where something can start as like a banter and then it goes deeper, and then that gives you permission to go a level deeper, and that's another level deep. It's like we've all been in that, especially, I mean, I've experienced it in circles of women where again it can start at the how you doing, and then it's like fine isn't quite true, let's go deeper. What I thought was really fascinating is that there are scenes where each woman reveals a secret or like a source of shame that she hadn't shared with others or was embarrassed to tell. And but each time you can feel, and I mean, almost I could see the weight lift off her shoulders. So I'm fascinated by that, because I do think that that's one of the most important qualities of connection, is that we can resonate with each other and hear, like, release each other from those feelings of shame by saying, like, me too, or, I feel that way too, or I see you and hear you, even if I don't feel that way too. So what inspired you to create space for that vulnerability among the characters?
Well, I think you're alluding to a scene where the characters, so it's like divided into 4 days. So I think I haven't read it in a while. I miss those characters so badly. I want to write a sequel to it. But I think there's a scene where they're getting comfortable. They've told their stories. They've gotten out into Montana. They've had experiences, and they're creating a dinner together. And they just in an impromptu way, start just talking about shame. And one character is like, shame that I haven't had children, shame that I've given everything to my career and fame, or shame that and they just go round and round the table like ricochet. And I think that could not happen if you didn't have the initial storytelling. And that, I always say that I'm not Willa. Although people are like, oh, you're so Willa. I'm not Willa. I would like to be Willa, but I'm not. But I'm none of these characters, and they are nobody that I know. And yet we are all these characters. There's something about each of these characters and their conflicts that we can relate with. So I think that once they've told their stories, then they can be more fluid about not even speaking in complete sentences, and they just ricochet around the table. Shame that I, shame that I, shame that I, shame that I. So that's the power of telling the story. And I will say that is one of the only scenes in the book that is completely autobiographical, not in the actual dialogue, but based on two friends of mine. We were up here in Montana just having like our own retreat, and that happened. And I said, I need to use this in a book, because we've spent hours and hours getting to know each other, and now we can just riff like that off of one another, and it's so cathartic. But I don't think that can just happen in a 1 hour workshop. I mean, it's something that needs to be built, and that's the power of making time to leave home and commit to connection with people that you can trust, even and especially when you're really scared.
Yes, because each character is struggling with their identity in some way. I completely agree with you that like I could see myself in each character. So mission accomplished. Like there were pieces that resonated with me. I have to admit, one of my favorite characters is Harriet. And Harriet, I love Harriet. She's a famous motivational speaker. She's a personal development coach, but she's completely lost her confidence, and she feels like a fraud, and she feels like the things that she is preaching, she is not capable of internalizing. And she talks about how she took on this persona for an audience, that she had it all together and that she was tough and strong. And then she's having to face this truth that she isn't actually the hard and like success driven persona that she had put out, or that she let her fans think that she was.
Yeah.
Can we talk about Harriet for a bit? Because I was mesmerized by Harriet, and I'd love to know what inspired Harriet's character, and then we can dig into the other characters too, because they each have resonance for all of us.
Well, Harriet either offends you or you can relate with her. And so writers say, I hope they say that whether we're writing fiction or nonfiction, long form, short form, sci-fi, dystopian, whatever we're writing, we're always still mining our lives. Like when Stephen King wrote Cujo, somehow he was mining his life. And it's really none of our business to know about that mining. So again, like I said at the beginning, if we're creating characters, it's what they fear, it's what they want, it's how they're in the way of getting what they want and all of that. What's their central conflict? What would it take for them to find resolve to it and to really dig deeply into it? And the Harriet character, if I was mining my life in the Harriet character, it's that central conflict of ambition, addiction.
Yes.
And I've had that one my whole life. Harriet taught me, like writing her helped me figure out that was something that I needed to look at and let go of, because it runs your life and it's a horrible way to live. And I lived it for a long time, even though I've been out here in Montana for 30 years. I left New York City and Boston and Chicago and Seattle and moved out here to live this pure writing life, but I still wanted that brass ring, And then it's when I let go of it that I actually kind of got it. And what I learned from that was what, Gertrude Stein said, there is no there. It's about doing the work. It's about being in the process of doing that work, whatever that is, being true to it, being honest with it, letting it be your guide. And Harriet, so I listened to an interview with Salman Rushdie recently, and he said, corner your characters. And that's kind of an aggressive way of saying it. But I say when I lead retreats or work with different clients, like put some pressure on their conflict, right? Because if you don't, how can they ever find resolve? And so I put a lot of pressure on each of these characters' conflicts. And I think out of all of them, maybe we'll talk about what the characters' conflicts are in a minute, but with Harriet, that was probably the most triggered conflict for me. So it was interesting to create her and just see, what if I took that ambition addiction off the cliff, which is what she did, and right into it. And so that's why she's my favorite character, because she really did something like I would never do. And I won't give it away, but it's sometimes writing fiction is healing in that way. You can let your characters do things that you probably would never do.
100%. And I as I think back, so I should also tell the audience that I first read your book right after everything closed. So maybe it was April 2020. So it was shelter in place. We were hunkered down. No one was seeing anyone. And the thing, I own co-working spaces that obviously, they closed down. So the thing that really resonated with me among all of the women's challenges, but probably the reason I was resonating with Harriet, is just this idea that we can be addicted to success as much as we want to be, and yet we don't have full control. We think we do, but we don't. And so I think what I felt with Harriet's character was just that she was forced to relinquish that control and to inspect that addiction to control, that again, we can all resonate with. But so tell us, since you, I'm glad to hear Harriet's your favorite character too, kind of another way that we're soul sisters.
Cheated on the other three.
I know, it's okay. I won't tell them. But tell us, I want to make sure we dig into Willa. Willa. So Willa is the main character. She lives in a town called Willa, Montana. There is conflict in just the very name of the town, the security of the town. Tell us a little bit about Willa and how she came to be.
Yeah. Okay. So I like the way I teach is it's about really finding the heart of the conflict, because that's when you go to the heart of conflict, which is a lot like saying, how are you in the grocery store? And somebody's saying, I'm not doing okay at all. And can we have tea? Because I need to talk. Right. So going into the truth. So The truth of Harriet is what we just described. With Willa, she and her husband, who's just died very young, very suddenly, are the cornerstones of this tiny homestead in Montana that Jack, her husband's name, inherited from his family. And so they both found each other based on their mutual love for the Emersonian dream of self-reliance. And so together they were self-reliant, which is interesting. And they created this whole homestead, and they brought in, so this is Willa, Montana, town of 34. And they brought in all the disenfranchised people that you find so often in the rural West. I can never say rural West. They brought in people who were, living in dilapidated buildings, and people who needed medication, people who used to be farmers and ranchers and who no longer could do it and just kind of rotting away. And they created this whole town. And they named it Willa, Montana. And Willa, when Jack dies and her sons are off at college, realizes that she's kind of been in this fantasy. I mean, it's not a fantasy, but she's been living it. She's been highly identified by the fact that she and Jack are so self-reliant, and they have their community garden, and they've got their, their wonderful traditions, and the whole town holds them to be true because this couple and this family is such the cornerstone, which happens so much in the West, in these small towns, and maybe everywhere. And then she realizes that without him, she's not self-reliant at all. And she feels really ashamed about that. And so I think a lot of when she creates this weekend, or it's a week in Willa's Grove, it's about interdependence.
Yes.
And that's what you do at the Hivery. That's what I do with Haven. It's bringing people together. And it's just sort of funny to me because they were telling themselves a story that they were so self-reliant, but the truth was that they created interdependence. And she learned that after he died, that's what she needed. And I won't give away the end. And it's not all tied up in a perfect bow at all.
I love it. I have to say, again, I was reading your book for the first time when things were locked down and there was no travel, and there was no travel on the horizon for quite some time. And I have never been to Montana, but I've always wanted to go. And I fell in love with Montana through Willa's Grove, even though I had never been there, but it was the perfect time for my imagination to wander with you into the expanse of Montana. And one of the things that really struck me was the natural surroundings of Montana, even the natural drama that the characters can, come upon. But I'm curious, because when we think about going on retreat or going away with girlfriends and having these vulnerable moments, I think of myself going into nature. And I'm curious about the role of nature and beautiful Montana in the story. And do you think that the story is anchored by nature in any way, or the way that the characters developed? Is that a function of them being in Montana?
I could talk about that for 2 hours. I'll try to rein it in. So it depends on what your definition of nature is, right? And that's the
Right.
word that we use, especially those of us who've lived in cities. Like, I'm going out in nature. I've lived here for 30 years. We don't go out in nature. Nature is all around us. So what we learn is that we are nature. Like I can't, I'm only as good as what the weather is. I mean, we've had, you guys in California know all about it, smoke. And I mean, just anytime you drive into town to get whatever, eggs, you drive by, 3 dead deer on the side of the road with bald eagles on them. Or you go deep into the woods where there's no cell phone service, and there, that they're grizzly bears, and you see grizzly bears scat, and you think, I am on the food chain. And that's part of why I live here, because Montana serves up a whopping dose of not just connection with what we call nature, I like to say wilderness, but it also we're on the food chain here, and I mean, this is a much bigger subject with all that's going on with weather all around the world. But I will say that Montana is a character in this book. And I never thought that I would be living in Montana and writing a book about a little town. And so here's the state of Montana. I'm way up here next to the Idaho section, Glacier National Park, Whitefish. But this is where I set the book, in a place that's not touristy at all. And because I wanted to capture those small towns where people really get truly disenfranchised. Like, there's no sushi bar in Willa, Montana. There's like a gas pump and a mercantile and a post office and a saloon, and that's, and then all the stuff that Jack and Willa created. So, but this idea of becoming wilderness, you can be nature in New York City, in an elevator in Midtown Manhattan. You can be nature anywhere you want to be, because there's a whole language that's going on. Have you read Braided Sweetgrass? This is a really good book that talks about this in a way that I'm not scientific enough to understand, but this is not like a woo-woo concept. And I sit on my screen porch, which is I'm in my dining room, and I listen to the birds, and I pay attention all year long, even in the winter. There's a language that's happening all around us. And if we think that we're superior to it, we're missing out, because we are a part of all of that language. We just have to learn how to listen. And so while the beginning of the book is about these women learning to listen together, then the rest of the book is about them learning to receive what Montana is teaching them.
Yes. And even take it with them. Because there's, I was thinking back, we've all had that feeling when we've, had an experience, whether it's a retreat or, a big hike or, whatever, some kind of special experience that's outside of our lives. And like, for example, I was very fortunate. I got to go in 2019, I got to go to the Amazon, the Ecuadorian Amazon. And it was this experience where Indigenous women and modern women were brought together in discussion about what it means to be a woman leader. And I swore that I would never, ever forget a moment, and I would take that whole experience with me. And that's a challenge, right? We get back into the day to day and life looks like life again. So there's a scene towards the end where Jane is talking about how free she's felt being in Montana, and being in this wilderness environment, and that she fears she won't be able to reproduce that feeling back in Connecticut in her regular life, which we've all had that feeling, right? When something's coming to an end. But Willa says to her, and you said this earlier, she says, "But Jane, you are nature." And I loved that line, because it's how we integrate our experiences. What does it really matter in our lives if we just go have these, trips or travels or whatever, and then we don't take it with us? So I love this idea of how you are nature, you bring it with you wherever you go.
And also, Grace, it's a lot like, and this is a very American thing. I'm going to go do Paris. It's how about you be Paris? How about you let Paris give itself to you? How about you let one moment of your life on a park bench where you're abiding by a quiet moment give itself to you? This is what this book is about. It's about these women going way outside their comfort zone, including Willa, because she's not used to having these people there, and allowing themselves to tell the story, go out into the woods, have these experiences where they forage, and there's a whole subtext with the town itself. But I love that when people come to Haven, I say the first night, allow Montana and Haven to give itself to you. And that's the that's the be versus the do. And I think after COVID, we're still in it, but with COVID, we have learned a lot about that abiding by, that staying by, that learning the quiet, and not being well, I'm going to yoga, and then I'm going to go to mindfulness class, and then I'm going to go on a retreat, and then it's let's stop that. abide, slow down, be with, let whatever's going on, whatever is the longing of your heart, give itself to you. And I'm not always good at it at all. At all.
Well, I always joke with the hybrid, like I definitely teach what I need to learn. So I get it. I'm there with you, but it goes along with, your initial invitation, both to the reader and to the characters of like, you are invited to the rest of your life. So how can you let that reveal itself to you, and how can you reveal yourself to it, if that makes sense? Well, so there's a couple other things that you touched on that I want to dig into, because there was one thing that was painful for me that I felt as a reader, like just the painfulness of rejection by people that you think are your people. And Willa goes through that. Like Willa is rejected by the townspeople of Willa, Montana, and they are shunning her. She's surprisingly broke, didn't realize it, but she's in a financial predicament and has to sell the town. Will you explain that a little bit? Because I think that piece, I felt pain around, because the resonance of being rejected by people that you think are your people. Will you talk a little bit about how they shunned her, why they treated her that way, and what you wanted us to take from that?
Yes. And I do a lot of book clubs. And so it's been really interesting, because with COVID, normally I would be out there like raise hands or Q&A, but mostly with COVID. And I've done a lot of events like this too, which has been great. But, when you're in the privacy of a book club and they all know each other, they can be like, I hated that town for being so mean to her, or what's up with Jack, like leaving her. Well, and I don't want to give away the book, but so that's helped me to figure out a lot about the book. And I think because I've lived in a small town for so long, I've had to really examine that. That was a surprise to me. I've heard that over and over again. Like, how could that town shun her? She's been such a cornerstone. She's a widow. And I think that in a small town, and think about it for all of you who are listening to this, maybe it's not that you live in a small town, but think about any kind of institution that you're a part of, where people are highly identified with it. We take each other personally, and we begin to identify. And if one person steps out of it and does something that is really different from, especially a leadership position, people take it personally. And it's also kind of that, like, we're only as strong as the weakest link, and to have the strongest be the weakest link, I think can be really disorienting for people. And I think that's what happened in Willa's Grove. And again, I didn't think about this when I wrote it, but I've looked at it and thought, yeah, you know what? They think of her as the one that's going to hold it all together. And she never really signed up to be that. And yet here she is having to leave, but she doesn't want to tell them, because she suspects that the reason why there's no money is because Jack, being a dreamer, was probably helping them. He built all their low-income housing. He put them all together in the first place. They believed in him. And then now he dies and she's leaving. And I think that that's something that's really specific to any kind of small identified institution. And so if you're listening to this and you think, well, I don't live in a town of 34 people in the central part of Montana, apply it to your work, apply it to your coworkers, apply it to your book club, anything that you're identified with. It's a small group. And imagine if you changed your behavior kind of overnight and didn't explain it, how people might react. And I think that's another wonderful thing about writing fiction. So you can just kind of create this whole thing, but that's actually quite human and can be applied to almost any people in any group.
And just that universal experience of like the pain and loneliness of rejection. And how, what I think is so beautiful is that here she was this, kind of leader of, she didn't volunteer to be a leader, but she is, she's a leader of this town in her own way. And they're rejecting her, and that's when she realizes the importance of gathering women in circle and telling that story. Because I think it is like the rejection is lonely. So I appreciated the connection between the rejection of, her environment and the people that she had known, and then the antidote of that rejection was connection, and feeling like she could gather and connect and be in community honestly with other women.
And the first, I'm raising my hand, the first draft, and again, this is the 19th draft, there was no town. There were no secondary characters. It was just those four women, Willa, Harriet, Jane, and Bliss. And then I brought in this whole, created the whole town. I can see it in my mind's eye. I've never seen any of it in real life. And I had no idea how that book was going to end. And I've heard that from a lot of readers. I had no idea, like, where's she going to land this thing? And I love where it landed, but it took me many drafts to finally get that landing. And the beginning of a book is easy. The middle's a little difficult. The end for me is really hard. Yeah. And this one, I'm proud of the ending of this book, and I love it.
Yes, beautiful. I don't want to say too much, but it's yes. I do want to allow some time for questions for the audience. So for the audience, you can put your questions in the YouTube chat. Before we get to questions, though, I have one last question for you that I think is important, because to me it feels like you're what's next, possibly. But you talk in the book about how you want to create a movement. You want to start a movement that creates permission and space to gather in this way, to be in community. Will you talk about what that means to you and your so now what around creating a movement and community?
Nothing I'd rather talk about more. So Willa's, this is called an ARC. This is what you get. This is the ARC. So it's a little well worn, but so this word grove, do you know that a grove of aspens is one organism?
Yes. Beautiful.
And not a lot of people know that. So when you see an aspen grove, really it's like the mother aspen that spread out all of her roots and then grew up all of the saplings. She dies and then they feed off of it and it becomes a grove. It's different with birch. I always thought birch was the same because they look similar, but it's aspens. And so Willa's walking through the field one day and she's with Harriet and she comes upon some aspen trees and she describes this to Harriet, and they all make walking sticks out of fallen branches. And Jane says something like, "This is what we are. We've become a grove." And so that's why it's called Willa's Grove. I want Grace to do Grace's Grove. I want to do one. I want to do Laura's Grove. And it's so funny because I thought, okay, well, I'll pick 3 people. It's got to be because that trust issue, right? That like out on scaffolding, like way out of your comfort zone. Like, so I would choose one person that I would know and love and trust, who's going through a major crossroads moment, which is every single person on the planet right now. And then that person would ask a person, and then that person would ask a person, and then right. And then you would gather someplace. Now, they all came to Montana because Willa was packing up her life and selling a town, and in a really huge time of crisis. I would recommend not doing that. I would recommend finding a place that's completely anonymous, where nobody's the hostess, where nobody's in their stomping ground. And I think that, we hope that we can do this sort of thing. Like I'm leading 3 retreats here in Montana, 2 in September, 1 in October. They're all full with wait lists because everybody's starved to tell their story, have gatherings, get away from home. But we still have COVID alive and well, and not well. But but I still think there's ways to do this in a safe way. So I hope that if you can read this book as a novel, let it give itself to you, enjoy the Montana character, enjoy the town, enjoy the characters, but also imagine what's possible for you if you could do the same and create something, because doesn't that give you hope and joy? I mean, I would love to do that. I would ask you, Grace, you want to do a grove together?
I mean, I couldn't love this concept more because in effect, it's why I started the Hivery. Like I always used to say that the Hivery was like a workspace that was the workspace part of the Hivery was transportation for something so much deeper. And that is this profound craving and yearning to connect in a real way. So I think that that's for me why I resonated with the book so much, because it's like, I just value that. And I've seen the value. I've seen what happens when you bring women together in this Grove way and you allow space for vulnerability, which is what you showed in the characters. Laura, it's a perfect segue to a great question that Jasmine Darsnick has brought to us. And that is, she is asking, having written both nonfiction and fiction, what do you see as the unique power of each to move readers into action? So
into action,
because I think it's what we're talking about here is like you used fiction to inspire a tangible movement that we can put in our everyday lives. So it doesn't have to be a nonfiction self-help step by step. You did that through fiction. So Jasmine's question is, how do you do that? What do you see as a unique power of both fiction and nonfiction to move readers into action?
Thank you, Jasmine. I love that question. I think we're all so sick of 10 easy steps and prescriptive self-help. I mean, I'm not trying to offend people who do that because I think a lot of people do it really well. And I'm writing basically a self-help book, but it's full of story. I don't know how to do 10 easy steps. There are no 10 easy steps to anything I know. In fact, so many of the people who come to Haven followed some guru or followed some recipe or some prescription, and they went really far and they lived it. And then it's like, it's hollow at the end for so many people.
Yes.
Story is everything. I believe in it. And when I say story, I mean writing in scene. So here's the difference. I'm just going to riff. Hopefully it goes well. I spent 19 years writing a novel, and I learned so many things about characterization and how to move a narrative forward and how to make a place a character. And it was deeply fulfilling to me. And what, are you even with me right now? No. Right. But what if I was like, it was a Sunday morning. I was sitting on the side of my bed and I was thinking, I really don't want to be the main character in a book again, not for a while. How could I capture what happens on these retreats in a novel without it being prescriptive? I'm going to do it. And you get that stirring, when you're creating something, whatever it is. I thought, oh, I'm so happy I'm not the main character in it. Like, because the messages can be shown through anything, right? Like playing the guitar around a campfire. So Jasmine, I would say, follow your heart's desire, whatever genre comes most fluidly. I always say, it's like, I help people find their voice, and so many people are throwing around that phrase. What does that really mean? It actually means when you're in your ease, when you're in your flow, that's when to pay attention. So play around with different genres and notice, not that it's easy material, but notice when you lose track of time and when it comes fluidly from you, pay attention to that. And then the message can come through in any genre. I hope that helps you, Jasmine. Thanks for your good question.
That's a beautiful answer. Beautiful answer. I think in general, what you're saying, it keeps coming back for me to that very first invitation of you are invited to the rest of your life. And what are you going to do with that? How are you going to listen to that? How are you going to let those stirrings guide you? So I really appreciate this. Laura, is there anything else that you want to add as it relates to this movement or your book or this experience? Oh, look at
They're
this.
So beautiful. I got 1,000 of these printed, and then I had to cancel 38 events, 2 of which were with the Hivery. These are bookmarks. I sent a bunch of signed ones to the Court of Madeira Book Passage, a Mecca. You should all go there, buy books.
Absolutely. Yes. Agreed.
And I've walked in there many times and loved it. And so this is a bookmark. And if you want to go into Corte Madera book passage and buy my book, you'll get a signed book. It's not a book plate, it's a bookmark. And there is a writing prompt on the back that comes from the book itself. And it's something that we're all asking right now. So now what? What do we do now? What next? What's next? And I hope that you'll support your local bookstores. I hope you'll support especially Book Passage in Corte Madera, and go in there, get a book, and you'll get this signed bookmark.
Beautiful, beautiful. Laura, thank you so much for this conversation. It's, I mean, again, I think one of the profound parts for me was just knowing that you wrote this book before the pandemic, and just how timely and urgent the conversation is now about how we gather in the various ways that we can, and the importance of community and honest, vulnerable conversation. So I want to thank you for writing Willa's Grove. I so appreciate it as a reader. I promise for those of you that are listening, it's a wonderful journey through 4 women's lives that you will find resonance in each of them. So Laura, thank you so much for a beautiful conversation.
Grace, thank you so much. And thank you for all that you do to gather people together in sacred space. And same with Book Passage. I've been looking forward to this. I don't want it to end. I think we must. So
yes, here we are at
time I'm
time.
in San Francisco. I can't wait to see you. And thank you all to all of you who showed up tonight, and keep supporting your local bookstores. This is really important. And all of your local everythings. We need to keep our entrepreneurs and our dreamers and our word wanderers alive and well. So thank you.
True enough, everybody. True enough. Thank you. Just one last time from Book Passage for supporting independent bookstores just like us. You can purchase Willa's Grove from our website. Just click the link that's in the YouTube chat, or go to bookpassage.com, or you can purchase it from us just like any other online retailer. We'll ship it right to your house. Promise. Again, just to reiterate, if you'd like to get a signed bookmark, they're in our store up in Corte Madera. Just if you can make your way into the store, ask for it, or if you order, make sure you put a little a note in the thing on the order form if you order it from us. One last thank you to Laura and Grace, just to pile on to this thanks parade. Thank you for coming out and for making such a good time for everybody. And one last thank you to all of you out in the chat today, for everybody watching this afterwards, and for everybody watching this live. Thank you for sticking it out, making it all the way through. Thank you to the people that asked questions. Sorry we didn't get to every single one of them, but that happens when you get people who are really excited to have a chat with each other. Makes for good conversation. Thank you one last time for coming out. I really do truthfully hope to see you all in the next one. Bye.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you so much. Bye,
Thanks, everybody.